I'm going to introduce briefly our final speaker, who actually is our keynote speaker, even though it's almost lunchtime. As Representative Jackson said, the president went over an hour past his allotted time. You know, they say he is superhuman, that he doesn't sleep. Well, I'm here to tell you he must not use the restroom either. But I was encouraged to hear that when he's on Air Force One, he's looking out the window for missiles. You know, that encouraged me, but it was great. And so our final speaker today is in his 8th year as the governor of Tennessee. He had never served in any political position when he ran for governor. He's a very successful businessman, but he actually was a plumber who went into business and grew his business into mechanical and electrical, and it did a business of hundreds of millions of dollars. But he entered the race for governor as a complete outsider from ground zero, with 2 really prominent political figures running for governor, and a lot of people loved him, but they didn't think he had a chance. My family got excited about him because we thought in our heart, is there any way in American politics where people are full of themselves and it's all fluff? Is there any way that a really good and decent man like the nice guy could finish first again? And he just ran up the middle, didn't say a word about his opponents except respectful, glad you're doing what you're doing. And he ended up winning. And he's been the governor of our state at an unbelievable time. We're in many ways the envy of the other states, but we're not here to talk about that. He's going to share his journey. And I would just say that he, more than any elected official that I've known in my 45 years of being in politics, is a man who has the character of Christ. And it's born from this incredible, deep experience of great tragedy and pain, and the heights of the topmost mountain, and the depth of understanding and compassion. And he is so humble. He's filled with the fruits of the Spirit, yet he's been very successful in American politics. It's incredibly rare. You're going to hear a little bit of his story, but please welcome, as our final speaker tonight, this morning, the 50th governor of the great state of Tennessee, Bill Lee.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Now, make your clapping fast. I spoke to Zach a few minutes ago and said, we should just not do this last speech. Everyone's been here too long. I assured him I would go quickly, but it is a real honor for me to be here. I'll tell you, I came to this first National Prayer Breakfast 25 years ago or so. Never imagined that I would be on stage, much less speaking. And look, I realize that I am actually the fill-in speaker for the who was proposed to be the keynote speaker. And if you think you're surprised that I'm the keynote speaker, I just found out yesterday that I was the keynote speaker. So I won't be keynote. I'll leave us with a thought. But I will say, as I stand here, it's strange how life works, isn't it? Where we find ourselves in places that we might never have imagined that we would be. We all have days in our lives that we've always remembered. Maybe the day you were married, or the day your parents divorced, or the day your first child was born, or the day your dad died. Those days that make up the story of our life. I heard it said that the days of our lives, there are days in our lives that can be described by a simple sentence. Then there's other days that chapters are written about. And I had one of those days. You have too, probably. Mine was in late July years ago. And on that day, chapters were written in the story of my life. I lived a life most men dreamed of living. Beautiful wife, beautiful kids, beautiful home, sprawling farm, prosperous business, loved God with all my heart. But on that July afternoon that I drove home from work, and I saw my son fishing and my other son playing, and my daughter was on a mission trip, and my 4-year-old was on a horse with my wife. And I drove up the drive of my home and thought about the fact that I must be the most blessed man ever. A few minutes later, I heard faraway cries of a 4-year-old. And I knew that something was terribly wrong, and I jumped in my truck and I drove as fast as I could. And I found my wife lifeless on the ground next to a horse. And that day in my life took a very dark turn. The staggering grief of children, the questions from a 4-year-old and 9 years old and 14-year-old, and a stunned father who doesn't have any answers for them. My oldest daughter, actually, in the days and weeks and months that followed, her confusing grief was so bad she actually got a gun and shot herself in an attempted suicide, which she survived miraculously. But on that day, the trauma of that for my family was overwhelming. My business was beginning to fail and on the brink of failure. The days of my life had become chapters of grief and brokenness and sorrow. And I remember a few months after my wife had died, we had this old farm cemetery. It was beautiful, iron fence and ancient tombstones out there, or 100 years old tombstone, but a family cemetery shaded by big trees, a beautiful spot. And I had ordered a marker for my wife's grave. And it was the day that these guys were supposed to deliver that marker. And I sat there on a bench, and these two guys showed up in a truck and erected the marker, put it up, and drove away, kind of leaving me bereft. And I walked up to the cemetery marker, and this beautiful marble carved Celtic cross with Proverbs 31 on it, the Proverbs 31 woman, and then 4 names of my children on the circle, and my wife's name on the bottom with the day she was born and the day she died. And I stood there looking at this, and it was very surreal. It is funny, isn't it, how life will take you places and you will find yourself in a place you thought you might never be. I knew that I would have a tombstone right there beside her. Might be 40 days, might be 40 years. And as I stood there contemplating that, I had this thought that went through my brain. I wonder what she would say to me standing right here. I wonder what she's doing. I know she's still alive, more alive than ever. And when the thought came to me, what she would say is what God would say and is saying. There are very few things in life that matter, and we should be about them. And as I walked out of that cemetery, I didn't know what the days held for me ahead, but I knew that I would ask God for the steps to move forward. Sometimes following God doesn't always mean that it's going to work out the way that we want it to. After all, Jesus did say that in this world you'll have many troubles, but he also said, I will overcome the world. And in my life, that truth then became real. and he became real to me like he had never been. Well, I had known him, but now I began to know him in a way that I'd never known him before. He became a healer and a redeemer and a dispenser of hope. The most tragic days of my life were strangely becoming the most transformational days of my life. What happened to me, I would never want. But what was happening to me, I would never trade. I started to realize that, or at least for me, to the degree that a man is broken, he can experience wholeness, or the degree a man understands pain, he can feel real joy. For the first time, I really believe I understood the brevity of life. My children and I, in a healing process, tried to get out of ourselves. I took my kids to Haiti and worked in an orphanage. I went to Mexico and built homes for the impoverished. I went to Uganda and South Sudan and worked in a refugee camp and built a home for trafficked girls. I worked in the inner city at-risk youth program for kids, and ultimately got involved in education reform and public policy around education, working with those underserved kids. I worked in a prison reentry program and a prison ministry, mentoring men coming out of prison. Got involved in criminal justice reform. This path of actually getting involved in public policy is what made me run for governor of Tennessee in the first place. My life began to flourish. My business was strong again. My family was restored. I met and married the most remarkable woman in the world. And my life was again, the story of my life was again filled with pages of certainty and a belief in God's goodness that was forged not only in prosperity, but through adversity and prosperity. As governor, I've had the opportunity to experience things as a more purposeful and meaningful person than I ever was before. I've had the opportunity to experience things that I might never have otherwise. The miracle of an adoption ceremony for a foster child through our Department of Children's Services, or in a tragic flood that we had in Tennessee, but being on the site, praying with a family who just lost their home, everything, including their father. The moments that I have had, that and many other, have been an incredible privilege and honor for me. As governor, I've had the opportunity to grant pardons to deserving individuals. I've done that many times in the last 7 years. Just a few weeks ago, I met with a man, and I'll close with this. I met with a man who I was about to grant a pardon. To my knowledge, I'd never met him before, although I knew about him because the application for pardon process requires a lot of information about him. I knew him, but I'd never met him to my knowledge. I asked him to come to the governor's residence on the day that he was going to receive a pardon, and he did. We sat down in my office, just the two of us, and he began by saying, "You don't remember me, but we met in 2008. And he said, "I was in prison, and I was invited to a gathering from a prison ministry called Men of Valor." And he said, "And you were the guest speaker that night. And you shared your life story to those men in prison, and I cried all the way through it. And I've never forgotten it." Now, and then he said to me, and in 2008, you were not the governor, and I was not Jelly Roll. And here we are 17 years later. Now, you may not know who Jelly Roll is, but the fact that this man and his redeemed life and his national, global renown was someone that I met in prison 17 years ago as a young boy, really, who had gone the wrong direction. It struck me as a reminder that there are very few things in life that matter, and we should be about them. You know, the pardons that I give as governor are earthly pardons. I have a belief that within every human being, there's this innate sense that we all need a pardon. Amen. And there is only one who can grant that pardon. And he has to be asked. And his name is Jesus. And I, for one, am glad that he summonsed me and I asked him and he pardoned me forever. Thank you for allowing me to share my story tonight.
Thank you, Governor. God has a plan, and his plan was for Governor Lee to deliver that story today. Amen? Amen. Amen.